The heroin epidemic exploding in yet another local community. Last week we brought you our 1-hour special on the crisis. Tonight we hear from the New Jersey police chief who says his department makes heroin arrests nearly every day. Why he says the epidemic is not a law enforcement problem. Plus, we are taking a look at the so-called war on workers. Why some economists say don't expect to easily climb out of the financial fallout you're facing because big business creating that pinch on purpose. And Mayor de Blasio comes out swinging, defending his wife after New York tabloids dubbed her bad mom. De Blasio says they've got the whole thing wrong and he's demanding an apology from the media. But an apology doesn't seem promising. Did the First Lady of New York bring the criticism on herself? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks so much for joining us this Tuesday evening, May 20th. Well, tonight we begin with a look at the heroin epidemic that is sweeping our region. Now, this past Friday, we dedicated our entire hour to this crisis. It is a fast-growing epidemic that's hardly a problem restricted to the borders of New York. Epidemic infiltrating a good homes and school systems all across the tri-state region. And in today's Times, an editorial says roughly 35% of heroin seized by the Drug Enforcement Administration nationwide just since October was confiscated by agents in the state of New York. And in years past, it went on to say, the state has accounted for about a fifth of heroin seizures nationwide. Ironically, on Friday, the same day that we aired our special, federal, state, and local authorities brought a 6-month investigation to a close. They arrested 2 men from the Bronx and confiscated 53 pounds of heroin worth $11 million on the street. Officials say the drug traffickers were traveling from New York to Connecticut where they were busted.
They were followed into a location in Hartford, Connecticut, and they saw them taking these packages out of their cars and entering a residence. When they followed into the residence, called out, identified themselves, believing that they were carrying heroin, the people appeared to be attempting to dump white powder down a drain. And we believe that we made a huge dent in a very substantial heroin organization. We feel that we really put an end to a heroin pipeline that was moving probably hundreds of thousands of glassines of heroin up the Northeast coast.
But it seems when you stop one source, another one pops out. And as we said before, this is not just a New York problem. Earlier today, I spoke with Police Chief James Batelli of the Mahwah Police Department in New Jersey about the crisis he's seeing throughout his community. I think some folks would be surprised that Bergen County, which many people think of when they say it, they think of affluence or certainly solid middle class, is among the hardest hit in the entire state. Try and put a face on this for the audience and how shocked they'd be if they saw some of the folks that your officers have either had to apprehend or even save here, because it kind of runs the gamut, doesn't it?
It does, sir. At one time, heroin used to be a drug on the dark side, but now we're seeing it as a mainstream drug. We're seeing all walks of life, all socioeconomic statuses being affected, from professionals to white-collar workers to blue-collar workers. And I think you're correct in saying that neighbors would be surprised to know that their next-door neighbor is using heroin on a regular basis. In many cases, they're very effective people in our community. They're teachers, they're physician's assistants, they're coaches, they're soccer moms. They don't need to be in jail. They need to have some counseling and treatment so they can get away from this drug.
And part of the problem is, as you said, people don't realize about some of the fatal consequences of this. But, I mean, in 1 year, just from January 12 to January 13, and I can only imagine the numbers have gone up since then, there were almost 200 arrests that were heroin-related. You have, that's not even counting even the distribution arrests that are part of this. The numbers keep spiking and spiking, and one thing I hear from law enforcement is, you guys aren't just expected to enforce the law, you're almost EMTs on the ground. You guys now have to carry Narcan, right?
Yes, Narcan, through the efforts of our prosecutor, Prosecutor Mahwah, within the next 4 to 6 weeks, all law enforcement officers in Bergen County will have been trained in the use of Narcan and will receive it as part of a grant. It's a vital tool to overcome overdoses, and we think with any luck we'll save some lives out there. You know, we've seen the explosion of heroin as a result of the addiction to painkillers, prescription painkillers, where people become addicted to them through some medical problems, and they become so expensive to continue that they turn to heroin, which is much cheaper, much more readily available drug on the streets.
But again, talking about the challenge for law enforcement right now, the idea that you guys, your job is to uphold the law and to enforce it when necessary, but now you're almost getting put into life-saving situations, and I know the prosecutor that you're mentioning not only is taking out four full-page ads, but they're also, I know you guys are trying to get the legislature to do more about this as well, because you're the last line of defense, but hopefully the message can get out there before it gets to you guys, right?
Well, what we're seeing is, we're arresting people on a Friday night for possession of heroin. They get a desk appearance ticket, they're released on their own recognizance, and they're back on the street. They're buying heroin 2 days later. And unfortunately, the laws need to be changed to increase drug testing for those that have been arrested for heroin. Right now, it's not satisfactory. People are going back on the streets or buying the heroin, and there's no deterrence or there's no motivating factor to make them stop.
You know, James, in looking at this, this isn't a white person's problem, a black person's problem. This is reaching across all socioeconomic lines, which you usually wouldn't associate with a drug like heroin. To that end, you've got a captive audience now. To the parents out there who say, well, it's not it, couldn't be my kid's school, couldn't be my kid. Talk about some of the faces here that you're running into that are using heroin and some of the ages. I'm seeing teenagers here, let alone folks in the early 20s. It's not on the folks on that last line of drug abuse that they finally spiral to heroin. You're talking about kids.
We're talking from teenagers right through people in the 50, 60-year-old range. There is no border to what heroin will do. They will take anybody in. It's a very addictive drug. It's something that, they can buy anywhere. And it's very concerning. We've seen this epidemic not only in Bergen County, throughout New Jersey, in Vermont, and other states. And they're all trying to respond to what has been a very, very quick injection of heroin into our society.
Chief, if you could get Trenton, if you could wave a wand and get Trenton to give you what you need on the ground right now that you don't have, what would it be?
Legislation to increase drug testing and drug counseling. These people don't belong in jail in most cases. They need to get counseling to stop their addiction to heroin.
Finally, if you went back 5-10 years ago, sir, how much of a difference between now and then does heroin occupy your police force? And I know that you're dealing with chiefs across Bergen County. How much time does it occupy of your man hours now than it did a decade ago?
In our jurisdiction, heroin arrests have doubled in the past 7 years. And that's a very sad commentary in an area like Mahwah, in an area like Bergen County. In the past 2 years, they've increased 50%, and we don't see it stopping. The influx of this drug from Europe, from Afghanistan, from Latin America, it's coming across all our borders. It's getting to our cities. It's getting to the children. It's getting to school grounds. It's something that really needs to be examined. And also the gateway drugs that are leading people to use heroin. It's not something that can be stopped with one initiative for drug enforcement, which we do in Mahwah periodically, but it's a full-scale problem that I think needs to be addressed at many different levels.
Well, Chief Batelli, I really appreciate the effort and the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, coming up next, everyone, we switch gears. We speak with an economist about the war on workers just like you. What big business doesn't want you to know about the financial pinch that you find yourself in?